Yeah, we haven't done a show in a long time. I haven't done a show in a long time either. I've been traveling and I haven't done a show in like a month. Do I? No. Yeah. So, I just got an email from somebody the other day. They said, well, you haven't done a show in a while, but if you want another guest for your show, we have somebody. I get rusty, too. You know, forget how to actually host this thing.
That's a shocker. You have email?
Yeah. So, what are we doing today?
Non-fungible tokens.
Non-fungible tokens.
Have you heard of CryptoKitties?
Yeah, I haven't looked into it other than when I heard that the guy made a kitty for like $100,000 or he sold it for $100,000. Right? Is that right?
Yeah, one was sold for 140,000. One was sold for 170,000 even. But
it's like just on screen, right? You can't. It's just a.
It's just on the blockchain.
Just on the blockchain.
Well, it's actually not just on the blockchain, but we'll talk about it.
Is it a game?
In more detail.
Is it like Pokemon type of thing? Is it?
It's not like Pokemon, but yes, there's a game that attaches to it.
All right.
But yeah, we'll talk about it a little bit.
It sounds very interesting. Is this anything like? I know that some companies are now they're digitizing assets. Like,
did you really just say that? Are you pulling my leg now?
Not digitizing assets. Sorry. Where they like autographs. Like there's autographs or like sports memorabilia.
Right. So
or baseball cards.
Yeah. So that's the other example of it. The MLB thing. So that's also an ESC 721. That's also an NFT. Also non-fungible token.
Okay. So great. Well, now I'm interested.
Okay.
I just had some of my baseballs and footballs and a helmet authenticated by Beckett. Is Beckett getting into this?
Beckett? Doesn't he play soccer?
No, that's Beckham.
Oh. Okay. Yeah, I don't know anything about cricket.
And I'm not even a soccer guy. Beckett, they authenticate sports memorabilia.
I'm sorry to hear that, but good.
Well, no, it's good because they were selling all these,
right.
And I had two baseballs that I bought years ago, a Joe DiMaggio and a Mickey Mantle, that turned out to be fake.
Oh,
yeah.
Really? Where did you buy them? Don't tell me.
I bought them at a baseball card shop.
Really?
Yeah, in Lake Forest. They're no longer in business because when I got
because
them back,
they sold
I actually
fakes.
went back to the place to go let them know, and they were out of business. And I'm like,
that's actually a really good pre-roll because we're going to talk about applications for that.
Right.
And you didn't even know.
I didn't, and this brings me closer to home now.
See? There's utility for the Wonder Dog.
Yes. So here we go. We're going to talk about
non-fungibles.
Non-fungibles. All right.
So since this is the hard word, we're going to start first with fungibles.
Okay. So should we go to the
let's
slides?
go to the slides. Yes.
Okay. Where is it?
And it went away. That's my article on Forbes to that topic.
Non-fungibles.
Digital non-fungibles. Yes.
Okay.
And so let's start with what a fungible is before we explain what a non-fungible is.
Okay.
So that would be slide number 1.
Oh, we're going back to. Sorry.
I'm dealing with professionals here.
There we go.
All right. So
fungibility.
Fungibility. So fungibility is kind of the idea that one item is exactly the same as another item, and it's not the same item, but it's interchangeable, right?
Okay.
So that's a quality that's typically thought after in things such as fiat currencies in printed form or in minted form, so your coins and your fiat paper money, if you want to call that money, but that's a different story we get to another time. And in commodities or consumer goods, as you can see here, even though all those Coke cans have a different color, but it's it's the same can as far as you are concerned, unless you're starting to collect those, and that's why specifically I chose those colors.
Okay. All right.
So now that you know what a fungible is, now we can go to what is a non-fungible. So in the context of crypto and the blockchain, a fungible is a unique virtual item. And typically when you have something that's digital, it's very, very hard. It used to be very, very hard, obviously, to create something that's unique and digital, i.e. an MP3 file. Once you have it, you make as many copies as you want and you send it around. And I have the same utility as you listening to this MP3 or MP4 file for that matter. If I have a PNG, an image of sorts, image file of sorts, if I make a copy, I send it to you, you have the exact same experience, you have the exact same image, and I still have a copy, right? So what blockchain introduced, and there specifically Ethereum initially with their ERC 721 standard, is what we call a non-fungible token. And so these non-fungible tokens create an entry on the blockchain. It exists only once, and it links back in this particular case to, let's say, an image, right? So a PNG, and I'll put one in there. And by the virtue of this being a blockchain entry and connected to the cryptographic token paradigm, I can use my private key, send it over to you, to your digital wallet. You have it now in your wallet, and I don't no longer have it in my wallet. So
you can actually transfer an image that can't be copied.
That can be copied. This particular entry that you then control certifies you have this particular item.
Wow.
So as we discussed in the pre-roll, this got somewhat mainstream media attention, was mentioned in the New York Times, and specifically because of some of the high prices that people were willing to pay for it. And one of the initial ones, if you jump to the next, I think it is, was sold for $140,000, and recently one was sold for $170,000. So what it does, it creates true ownership. So this was the one that Igor bought, and he actually outbid another prominent figure for that. So he paid $140,000 in Ether, though, at the time for it. So if you translated this back into Ether, because at the time Ether was worth much more, it would be less. Regardless, I mean, for all intents and purposes, that's what he paid. And Mike Novogratz, who a lot of people watching this will probably know, is one of the more famous figures in the cryptocurrency space, had participated in that bidding procedure up to $115,000.
Really?
And then stopped. But he still thinks it's going to be worth a couple $1 million in 10 years from now. At least that's what he said. But I think what's more interesting is kind of the next slide, and that speaks to the utility of this, which means this is our friend Vitalik, the Ethereum founder, obviously. And he really likes this paradigm because he had been an avid gamer, as a lot of people in the blockchain space have been before they got into the space. And he had lost one of his in-game characters in 2010 after Blizzard stopped supporting a certain game. And so now, even if the game was no longer supported, that you would use this particular character on because it's recorded on the blockchain, you could still hold on to your game character, and then presumably once a game will be developed that will then allow the importing of that particular character, you could again use it, because as you can imagine, you can add additional skills and outfits, be creative with your character or in-game items, and then it seems like very natural that you want to hold on to that and keep using it regardless if the game changes, so to speak.
Well, right? Once they create the game and that character, or the CryptoKitty, is there a chance that these things die or that they no longer exist?
Well, there's two things to that. So first of all, the main thing to differentiate is, for the time being, the blockchain utility is somewhat limited in terms of just signifying the ownership. So what you're transferring is the ownership to that item. And for the time being, and we'll get to this in further slides, but none of the other characteristics that are in the game environment will be transferred. What I mean by that is, so you use your CryptoKitty as an example inside of the CryptoKitty game. The CryptoKitty game, though, is happening on a sidechain or in that particular game environments for all intents and purposes in the database, right?
Okay.
So any features such as breeding of those kitties or racing them or any other new game environments that they can come up with, because this particular implementation is an open source code, that's limited to that particular sidechain. So that means if the company or the project that's maintaining this particular environment goes away, all the functions go away with it. You still hold on to the entry, you still hold on to whatever is on mainnet, so you can go to a block explorer now and see your CryptoKitty, but if that game environment should go away, so that's all there is. It's something, it's better than nothing, but the interesting part is then to see what particular functions the game environment provides that have utility for the blockchain itself. Yeah. So the breeding function, for example, it's like, should there be a standard on the blockchain, a protocol on the blockchain that documents that? I mean, the answer seems obvious, but it doesn't exist yet.
Okay, got it.
But so the point there is you have a game environment where you can test those ideas.
Okay.
And if you transcend this away from your kitty and move this to other things, you can obviously then create way more interesting scenarios, i.e. You have your virtual game character, right? So your mini you, and your mini you is male and has a certain stature and a certain height and a certain rights and so forth. So if you test those in a game environment, you can see how eventually you can implement those protocols and have real world usage for it, right? So I was just giving some input on systems that provide blockchain utility for the healthcare space, right? So you can see where you can test certain scenarios of what type of records and how to track those records, and can just use the gaming environment to do so. Does it make sense?
Yeah. Got it.
All right, so let's move to the next. Let's see what else I noted down.
Okay.
Jotted down. So
well, that's very sad that he cried himself to sleep on that whole thing.
That's what he said. So to put this into perspective, I think for some reason we spoke about this before. Maybe
in-game items. Yeah,
in-game items. Yeah. Yes. So this industry is bigger than video, and
which is bigger than
Hollywood,
the game itself,
and it's bigger than the game itself, and that's where most of the revenues are coming from. But I think you can easily see how if people spend $1 or $5 or sometimes hundreds and thousands of dollars for an in-game item, that if that item or that particular game goes away, you'd still like to have ownership of that item since you spend money for it, right? And you might even want to be able to sell this to someone else. And right now, outside of a couple of second marketplaces, what's happening is people need to actually transfer their entire account, right? So you can't easily sell these items separately. You need to hand over whatever account information are necessary to access the game itself, when you might only want to sell a certain item that you acquired in the game environment. So with blockchain technology and the particular standard, this non-fungible token standard, that's going to be possible and can actually happen on an app, as an example, on your phone. So you don't actually have to access the game environment at all, right?
Okay.
So you can transfer ownership peer-to-peer.
Wow.
So then there is another extension of that. So which one of our partners that we're working with introduced this multiverse gaming idea, the idea that you can create one item and transfer it from one game to another, which is, needless to say, super powerful. Specifically, it pertains to a character.
Okay.
Because chances are you want to be the same character in one game and then in the next one. And it will then also allow those developers to create one-of-a-kind items and sell those. So that means that you don't just get to pick from a limited number of items, but potentially an unlimited number of items. So you can imagine a scenario where eventually you'll be able to, not eventually, pretty near term in my opinion, you'll be able to commission your specific character for a certain game. I want to look a very specific way, a unique way
Yeah.
in a particular game, and this new technology makes this available to you and lets you own this, and you're the only person on that planet then that owns this. Just you would be the only person in a real world scenario that gets to own a certain Picasso or another piece of art.
Oh, okay. Well, no, that goes to another question now. So, if you have a character that you can transfer between games, does it only exist while it's playing in that one game? It can't exist in two games at once.
It's up to the game developer. So the SDK, the software development kit that enables that, allows the game developer to change those particular rights to that character.
Because if we're talking about the blockchain, and you were saying like there can be only one crypto kitty,
right?
That if that character exists, he could only exist in one place at a time, right?
Yeah, and so there's two elements to that. So as I mentioned earlier, the blockchain really only documents your ownership of it.
Okay.
Right, so that doesn't mean it can't then exist in two different environments, right? Because it will always exist on the Block Explorer.
Because you're not transferring ownership of it.
You're transferring ownership of it.
Oh, you
are? Well,
if it's in two different environments.
Not the environments. You transfer ownerships between
if you own
individuals. Yes. Okay. But the game environment, again, that's a side chain. Nothing happens per se unless that's built in through the SDK, unless the game developer decides, okay, if you use it in that game, I'll make it disappear in the other one, right? So that's simply a software decision that for the time being, again, it's only for the time being that this is not possible on the blockchain itself. I mean, you could write a specific, it's going to be written into the specific smart contract for this particular item. Mm-hmm. But again, it's a smart contract is obviously not the protocol itself.
So the smart contract would say if you're using it in game A, you cannot, it won't exist anymore in game B.
Correct. So while you're writing this particular relationship, you attach.
Or if you lose it in game A, it'll never exist in game B again.
Or it could just die.
Yeah.
It could have a concept called permadeath, and it could just stay forever in that game and be hooked to that game. Right?
Okay.
So that's, I think, the moniker I came up with, but probably someone independently published that too. So in CryptoKitties, a new kitty is born every 15 minutes. So if you carry this paradigm forward to other games, you can imagine a lot of interesting scenarios where a games studio or publisher could create a new hero like every hour automatically, like write an algorithm and create something that's somewhat unique from all the others every hour programmatically, puts it out for auction or for fixed price for sale. But you will see the game environment becoming more and more like the real world, essentially, other than your typical game environment would have a lot of the same characters, and here you would see more and more unique items over time. And if you move to the next slide, this is just a couple of examples where you can basically do simple things and exchange them. This is one of the kind of current implementations, but you can also envision where you pass these out to the blockchain, where people will then be able to upgrade their armor or their belt or their weapon slots or their wigs or whatever you have individually on that item. So not only would you obviously be able to create entirely new game characters, but also the accessories for that. And so there's already a few wallets. When you move to the next slide, you'll see those that support this. So your typical Ethereum wallet will support this ERC20 standard. So that's the reason that most people will know that this particular environment is so interesting, because there are so many wallets and most exchanges support this particular standard, ERC20. And so this new standard, this ERC 721 standard, although it's no longer that new, was forked into mainnet in June. This is now supported by a handful of wallets out there. So and Coinbase published a separate wallet that supports the standard. Engine did, and our friends over at Mozilla did. So what this allows you to do, I can sit next to you and I can pull up my wallet here and then just show you the collection of my 721 tokens, and you can say, oh yeah, I like that one, can you sell that to me for $1, and then it wants me to upgrade, obviously, now that I'm trying to show it. But here is one of my felines.
Oh, look at that.
And so I can transfer it from here to you.
Wow, you have a
Right, so
CryptoKitty.
I actually have a whole herd now.
You do?
Because I've been demoing it so much that I keep reading them while I show it. So now I'll send you this one later.
Oh my
so
God.
you can have it.
Wow. Well, I'll show it to the kids at home there.
Oh, mine, yeah. Yeah, it's fuzzy.
Wow. Look at that.
Well, this is now Wonder Dog's kitty, so Wonder Dog gets to have it.
That's awesome.
And we'll send a couple of other ones. But
Yeah.
so this all sounds just like goofy and maybe semi-interesting and funny and whatnot. But from a venture capital's perspective, there's actually real-world utility to be had, and I think we're going to move over a little bit more into that realm now. And so there's already a bunch of websites now where you can buy and sell these items, and typically they came from the skin sales item, so from the old world game item, if you will, from the legacy systems, where some of the publishers already allowed the resale or pre-sale of these particular items. But then they also now support these new standards. So if you go to Wax, you'll be able to then buy CryptoKitties there if you want, if you choose to. And
So these are the websites, Wax, Rearbits. Okay.
Yeah, OpenSea, yeah. So
Okay.
the ship there, that's OpenSea. So
All right.
you could buy and sell your 721s there if you wanted to.
Wow. Okay. So you can put them up for whatever you want to on there.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful.
So let's see, what do we got? So the benefits of an initial collectible offering. So my partner coined this term, which I find useful because it's still resembling this old paradigm. But now, if you're a game developer, it might be interesting for you to test your theory that this game is going to be interesting for people out there by just creating a bunch of your in-game items and create them as 721s and try to pre-sell them, right? Try to go out there and offer them for sale so you can test whether or not people are actually interested in your particular game environment. Create a white paper that says, okay, this is what I have in mind. My game should be doing this. My game characters and my game dynamic is the following. What do you people think? Do you want to basically fund the rest of the development for this particular game, right? It allows you to create a community.
Wow.
And it's an interesting variation in my mind for on an initial coin offering that actually is more engaging and actually provides a good utility for game enthusiasts out there to either fund their game or support their game. And think about it this way. Let's say that team would not sell enough items to finish their game.
Mm-hmm.
You would still own that particular item, and presumably, if it's interesting enough, would actually be worth more.
Wow.
Right? Because
Okay.
the game never got made.
Yeah.
I mean, that's always the example that I made. If you're old enough, you'll remember cartridges from the Atari era, right?
Mhm.
And so this one ET game, if you haven't seen the documentary, watch it, where Atari tried to make a game based on ET, which is...
I think I had that game.
You have that game?
Yeah, I think I
'cause
did.
They
Yeah.
only sold, I forgot what the actual number was, but they expected to sell millions of copies, and they ended up selling a few thousand of copies. So
Yeah.
most of them ended up in a landfill, and then because most of them never went into distribution, it became a collector's item. So
Wow.
so you got a collector's item. So
Yeah.
the story there is you could assume that something similar could and might and will happen if a game ends up not being
Yeah.
goes
So you
into
still have
production.
the-
You still have your in-game item.
That's awesome.
And so there's other interesting scenarios how to make those items where you actually build in coins. If you use the engine development, software development kit, where you can actually build in coins, so you kind of have a base level value of those. And if that coin goes up, your item goes up regardless, right, in value. So
Okay.
and that's the reason why our company formed a partnership with that, because it's a very interesting concept that also then translates to the real world really, really well. And that's something that we sketched up in this particular scenario. So we'll do a couple of initial wine offerings next year. So and here's where the connection is. So
actual wine.
Yeah, and so the way this will work is if you have a winery, and right now the way you're presumably selling this, you by having your salespeople call up a couple of distributors and tell them, well, we expect to bottle about 100,000 bottles this year, and we're typically selling them for this particular price. We're thinking this is a good year, we want to sell it for a little more, and you're trying to do your price discovery, and it's pretty hard to get to a correct pricing model in this particular field, right? Because unlike other commodity items like your corn and so forth, which is fairly stable, wine is kind of its own thing, and a couple of other semi-commodity goods are more or less interesting based on the rarity, based on the qualities that are being assigned to them, right? And so why the blockchain standard makes sense for this particular case is just envision the following. So you can create a number of non-fungible tokens on the blockchain.
Go to the next one.
And then pre-sale those NFTs that will show your actual item that you'll be getting. But the item will be attached to a real world good. So actually we wanted to first show the previous one so you get a little more granular detail, because this is kind of the big picture. Okay. So the left part is showing the Ethereum blockchain, right? So you're creating your NFT that you then typically would show as a QR code. So now you got a unique entry on the blockchain and a QR code. So you got your QR code then on the bottle. And so needless to say, the bottle doesn't have to exist at the time when you create the blockchain entry. So you're expecting to create 100,000 bottles at a minimum, and you expect it to be of a certain quality and look a certain way. So you can create a pre-sale market of that particular inventory, put it out there for pricing basically, and tell people, hey, this is our expected outcome. You can buy a particular bottle right now, and it's at this particular price. We don't know what the price will be.
So they're guaranteed to get a bottle of that?
They're guaranteed to get a specific bottle.
Okay.
That's the interesting part.
Oh, so you can go through number one, or you can find out whatever.
Exactly, because even
the first bottle or the last bottle or the middle bottle.
And what's interesting from there, obviously, is once you have a specific item that you're buying, so you can then create more interesting variations to track that particular bottle. So you can have an app with your wine cellar on your phone, and because it's relating back to a unique entry on the blockchain, it will also know, quote unquote, about what happened to the rest of the batch. So you're starting out with 1 out of, let's say, 10,000 bottles. Yeah. And then eventually you look at your wine cellar and think, wow, I got 1 out of 10 bottles left of this particular year. And you can
so you would actually know how many are left in the world.
Know, and you don't necessarily have to take delivery of it either. So either the winery or there's wine custodians out there would just keep that particular bottle, and you can buy it simply for speculation.
Yeah.
Right, and because you're a collector, and you create an entirely virtual market place, but it's relating back to very, very specific items.
Wow.
And so the reason why, I mean, this is already very interesting, but the reason why to us this is very interesting is because now you're starting to reach over into the real world from the digital world, right? Okay. So you got your fungibles, now you got your non-fungibles that I call the blockchain native fungibles. So your Bitcoin is blockchain native. That's where it was born. That's where it always existed. Then you got your digitally native goods, which are like your games, your music files, your video files. Mm-hmm. You can attach a new blockchain entry to them to make them trackable, uniquely trackable. And then also, and that's part of The article that I just published in Forbes is explaining in greater detail. If you look back into the history of music distribution, for example, it used to be you would buy first a cassette tape. Actually, it was first albums, like long play albums on
40,
12
inch and then 45s.
Yeah,
and
so
then,
and then tapes and then CDs but now hardly anybody still buys CDs anymore, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
obviously, if you buy a long play, if you have a cassette tape, if you have a CD, once you don't like it anymore, I can sell it to you, right? So I bought this for $20. I don't like it anymore, and I can sell it to you for $10, and it still holds some form of a trading value. Well, after this paradigm kind of died with the introduction of platforms such as iTunes, where you don't actually get true ownership, you get a license of sorts, right? You get the license to be able to use this particular MP3 file or whatever format they have, and it's encrypted with digital rights management in a certain way, so you get to use it in your own devices, in like up to five devices in iTunes case, or you're renting something on Amazon, or even if I buy something on Amazon once in a while, I'll buy a movie on Amazon, but I buy it in a way that it shows up in my Amazon library, but I'm unable to sell it to you after I watched it, right? Yep. So unlike when I bought a DVD before, I could watch it and then sell it to you and then kind of mitigate my expenditures there. Now, with this new standard, you can do this again.
That's great. Yeah,
so
you're not stuck with an MP3 that you didn't like and you can't get rid of it.
Right, of course. I don't expect iTunes or so Apple to adopt this anytime soon, because this is a huge money maker for them, obviously. And
they will stop making as much money.
It would cut into their revenue, presumably. Maybe not, but presumably it might. But we expect to see platforms that will introduce that paradigm. And then they are probably starting with independent artists first and then moving on to larger production studios once people will expect this paradigm. And also, you're in a way introducing another type of buyer, right? So if I'm buying something and I cannot return it or I cannot resell it, then my threshold, my friction is higher. I will think longer and harder about an expenditure if I can never resell this to someone else. Like when you buy a car for cash, presumably you have that idea of eventually I'll be able to resell that, and I'm not stuck with this forever. So that's why it might, in your mind, you're thinking, okay, I'm spending $10,000 now, and I can ride it for a couple of years, and then I'll still make a few $1,000s afterwards, kind of the residual effect. So you can imagine that similar considerations might factor into digital goods as well. Like when I spend $20 on an early release of a movie on Amazon, if I know that I can recoup 50% of that afterwards, I might be more likely to sell that or to buy that in the first place. But again, these are all market dynamics that I will figure out. Then the final slide to that, and that's why this is such an interesting topic, is once you have an item on the blockchain at an immutable record, you can expect to see more and more interesting developments on the actual main chain protocol. So what this slide is trying to explain to you, so you got the upper half, you got your blockchain level, and the lower half is kind of the real world, and we need to fix that later. All the real world items belong on the bottom. And so like I explained earlier, you can start by just creating the entry and just basically create a database with information that it's linking back to this entry, i.e. this database entry is connected to this particular blockchain address, and it signifies ownership for a 2018 bottle of red wine that has been bottled in this particular region on that particular day from this particular plot that looks a particular way. And then it goes to a virtual market of sorts, and then ownership to the entry, and with that the right to the bottle gets transferred to another person. And then from there, you would assume that, okay, eventually I might want to take possession of the actual item. So now what happens? It goes onto a truck, right? So now it's in the supply chain. And there you'll have other blockchain applications, right? So you'll have information about routes, you have information about the vehicle, you have whatever type of information you might be interested in storing. So what we expect to see is you got more elaborate blockchain protocols, main chain protocols that facilitate that particular behavior and then link back to this NFT. So once it, to make it more digestible and more visceral in a way, is once it arrives at the next storage facility, and that storage facility also deploys a blockchain-based IoT solution, as an example. You can then reliably track that this particular bottle, for example, was always kept at a certain temperature.
Oh.
So, because the blockchain will provide you with the information that's associated with this particular warehouse, that this particular bottle was in at a particular time.
Yeah. And they keep all those records. And
yes.
That lives on the blockchain forever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was not possible in the past. Or would
you
have
could fake all of that. You could forge all of that. And
not
you could
only
just make that all up.
Yeah, not only could you forge and fake all of this, but think about like just the detailed information that you would have to transfer, because really what happens in the first place is so you got your product, right, and then you bottle it, you box it or something else, and then you hand it over to someone who's transporting it. So typically what this particular individual gets is a like stack or maybe just one piece of paper that just will say, oh, he picked up 5,000 bottles of this particular wine. And that's that, right? Yeah. So that's the little piece of information that makes it from that first data silo to the next data silo, which is then the warehouse, for example. So you don't know nothing about the warehouse, right? And specifically, you have no way of tracking the relationship between the particular bottle that you then buy as a consumer to narrow down whether or not this bottle that now you uncorked and it turned, you don't know who was the responsible party for this, as an example. Yeah. And you can, needless to say, come up with many, many more examples where this has great utility. The one that always comes to mind first to me is there's almost no year that goes by when you don't have a recall from a particular brand of car, where a car gets recalled because they had
constantly.
Yeah, they had
electrical, mechanical, structural. There's always something that's going to happen.
Yeah, and what happens in all of these scenarios is that they're going to call back all of these models. So if you got a Ford Explorer that was made between this and this time, you get these letters in the mail, right? Then please bring it in. We need to inspect it. So, and 9 out of 10 times. They won't replace anything because they just check and say, oh, yeah, it didn't have the faulty part. It was only XYZ. The reason for that is because you could not track the individual parts. So if you were able to track this particular part from its inception, have it be born on the blockchain, so to speak, track it down all the way to when you swipe your credit card or otherwise take possession of the title for that car, and you could identify, well, this particular vehicle is also linked to these particular other items that were stored in a certain way, were shipped in a certain way, etc. Then you could actually pinpoint to the batch that had this particular fault, right? Yeah. And you can easily see where this can save millions of dollars in otherwise wasted time and expenditure, because before that you were unable to have this granular function of tracking. Yeah. And just
phenomenal.
Yeah, if you multiply this just by the time that gets wasted because you're not able to do this, right? So
millions of man hours all over the country,
Yeah, if you recall 5,000 cars, right? So you got 5,000 people that need to spend whatever time they need to spend to return the car, pick it up again. They are unhappy about that. The dealership has to pay for it. No one, and
All those texts that are sitting there working for nothing.
This is just one of many examples. But
well, then also on wine, because I had done a show with a guy that actually the same day I met you.
Yeah.
A guy, Jacob Nair David, that had a wine utility token. He had a winery in Jerusalem, in fact.
Okay.
And he was blockchaining there, and he was talking more about the fact that you could verify that this is actual real bottle as opposed to fake bottles. There was a whole thing with counterfeit wines.
Right, and so that's kind of a small implementation of that, I presume. Back then, the standard didn't exist, but so it's all about, honestly, being able to track this on the public blockchain, because a lot of these functions right now just exist on the sidechain, which is basically to say they exist in a database that a certain entity controls. Okay. So a lot of these particulars still need to be implemented, but that's why we're looking at the space. So we're looking at other applications in the space already. Long term, they're then becoming super interesting also from the actual widespread adoption of these. You can imagine a scenario where you have a point of sale system that's attached to the blockchain that has all that information, right? So you would just hold your phone next to the POS system, and it will move also. Not only would you move the physical pieces into your cart, but this particular app would then move the virtual implementations of those items into your virtual apps, right? So it would add to your virtual wine cellar, or it would tell you, this is my virtual fridge, right? So you could see that this is in my fridge. I bought this on this day. You could see it on your phone. So that gets rid of all these ideas of smart refrigerators, right? Because it's more useful to track when you bought it and know when it was produced and how it was treated, rather than I have a picture of it in my fridge or not, because it's not going to provide you with that particular information, with that particular history. And so there's an enormous amount and wealth of information possible once you start going down these particular token standards. And that's why we are super excited about the 721 standard, then the evolution of that, 1155, where you can create this granularity of information and then transfer this across the value and supply chain. And so that's how we're looking kind of at the space. What has immediate utility and will save suppliers and consumers real money and time, right? Because a lot of times when people talk about blockchain implementations right now, they just talk about cryptocurrencies and CryptoKitties. It takes a little bit of explanation, I think, to see what the actual utilities of these are. There's very few people that talk about that right now, and very few people, I think, understand right now that go into this type of detail and spend the time to analyze what's possible, what should be implemented, and what should be implemented today. Right?
Yeah, and then once they've come up with those ideas, and they need a whole team of developers to create that app or that environment, right?
Yeah, and so we're trying to educate this particular space right now. So we're working with a bunch of game publishers, and so we're working with a bunch of wineries and tequila companies and whiskey companies, and and so and that's mostly to further this particular standard, right? And then do the implementations on top of that, because also from a VC's perspective, if you're on top of your game, you want your portfolio companies to have this particular advantage, right? If you're in the supply chain game, if you're in the POS game, if you're in the gaming environment, you want your portfolio companies to have early access to that, right? So, and know what you should start working on today. If you're doing a game today, you must implement these particular standards, right? Because it just creates another audience for you. It creates more utility for you. It creates more utility for the buyer. It opens up other marketplaces. It gives you options.
Yes, it does. Phenomenal, man. This is great. Well, it's cool to start seeing
Right.
more of the actual implementation of the usefulness of the blockchain instead of just hearing people talking about, oh, we need the blockchain.
What do you need it for? And
Yeah.
and most of the time, specifically, if the incumbents use the word, it's just a slight upgrade from an actual database. Most of the time, you really don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes down to understanding the principles of the blockchain, because the principle of the blockchain is it allows you to create value transfer protocols that lead to peer-to-peer systems. So what I mean by that is, so all the things that we outlined just now, they take out a lot of middlemen. They don't take them all out,
increasing
right?
the cost of something for no reason.
Right. They don't take them all out, obviously, but the initial exchange from production to from production and buyer, right now you could do a peer-to-peer, right? Obviously, after that, there's still people involved that need to actually transport the item and so forth, and maybe even build a marketplace, but you don't have to. You could just put your inventory online before it's even created and let the market find the price for you. And you probably should, right? At least with a subset of your inventory, you probably should. Because right now, this whole price finding process for a lot of these items is left to middlemen that obviously have their own agenda, right? So they're going to play one provider against another one because they also need to make a margin for their efforts, which a good portion of that you should avoid, right? You should just sell it directly to your most important customers and clients. Specifically, if you have something that is limited in supply, like a wine or something else, where your inventory by definition is only going to be 100,000 bottles, or it's an item you wanna create in a scarce way, where you want to create artificial scarcity, or you want to create something that's very special and you just want to test something, right? It's very hard to do this right now, because in order to get it on the shelf of, let's say, a supermarket, if you have a product that requires wide production, you would incur a lot of cost if you were to set aside part of your production and create that particular specialty wine that is, I don't know, aged longer or has this particular nuance because we added something to the soil, or whatever scenario you could imagine. Mm-hmm. And this paradigm allows you a lot of creativity, because now you can, send an email to the actual end user, and you can build this end user connection and tell them, hey, let us know what you think about this. We made a limited supply of 10,000 bottles. They have a slightly orangey flavor, and if that's something that you might be interested in, we'll put it up for pre-sale. And now you have an argument to go back to the supplier and say, yeah, this sells because we sold 10,000 bottles already. Wow. In the expectation that people are going to like it, right? Yeah. And you don't really get this option in a lot of cases, right? In a lot of scenarios where, hey, you have to make it first and get it into someone's hand.
Wow. Well, great, man. I see a lot of these wineries, especially in Temecula, that could really benefit from this.
Yeah, I think everybody should at least give it a try. Yeah. There's very little to lose. It's a little bit of time and effort, but we have a team here that can help with that, and
Well, it's kind of like I understand that when Porsche came out with the 918, they sold them before they made them.
I didn't get one.
You didn't get one?
No.
Okay. Yeah, they'd actually sold. They did a pre-sale of these.
Yeah.
They did a test market, realizing that there was going to be a gigantic demand, so they had sold a bunch of Porsche before they had actually made them. So they actually had the money to build them before they shipped them.
Yeah, Tesla does this to some degree too.
Yeah.
But yeah,
you buy the car first and they build it.
Well, yeah, and you put some money down if you want a new Roadster. Did you put some money down yet?
I'll go write him a check today.
Okay. You do that.
Yeah. All right. Well, great, man. It was good seeing you again.
Good to see you.
Yeah. Let's keep it going.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm preparing something right now on.
Oh, you've got articles coming up on Forbes. You've had articles before.
Yeah,
right?
this is more detail on the whole 721.
And are you just going to be a regular on?
Yeah, I'll try to give them something once a month on average. So they publish a few things that I wrote in the past and on topics that we talked about too, about the DAO and about crypto investing. And right now I'm writing on two topics. One that we talked about in the past, this whole security token topic, which doesn't seem to be going away. And then I have some thoughts on the future of money, basically.
Yeah.
So
All right.
I'm trying to
We'll
put some nuances on that. We'll see.
We'll do a talk on that.
Yes, we will.
Cool. All right. Good seeing you. All right.